I learned I had a 36-year-old son on the same afternoon the woman I loved put my name down as her next of kin, even though we hadn't spoken in more than 4 decades. That day cost me a past I thought was settled and handed me a future I never believed I deserved. Hey folks, it's Hank from Mind-Blowing Stories. Before I get into this one, I need your help. 96% of you who watch aren't subscribed, and I'll be honest, that number makes me a little sad. I sit here in my little basement studio with my old coffee mug and these memory boxes and try to tell you the truth about a life that didn't go the way I planned. If you like hearing a stubborn old man bare his heart, hit the subscribe button, give this a thumbs up, and drop a comment when we're done. Tell me if I did right or wrong. All right, let's roll back the clock. I was 19 the first time I drove past the water tower in Eden, North Carolina, in a sun-faded pickup that sounded like a lawnmower with a cough. It was the summer of '78. I'd left Dayton, Ohio 2 weeks earlier after a bad argument with my old man about whether electricity was safer than building cars. He said if I took that lineman job and traveled with the crew, I'd end up fried on a pole. I said if I stayed, I'd end up bitter as he was. We said worse things too, and then I left. We were down in North Carolina stringing new line after a tornado tore through. That's the kind of work I loved. Hot sun, heavy gloves, honest sweat. You sleep like a baby because the day took everything. The motel smelled like chlorine and cigarettes. There were water spots on the ceiling, and the carpet was loud as a clown suit. But I felt rich. I was out there making my own life. The diner where I met Claire sat on a road that cut through tobacco fields and looked like a postcard from a time when people still wrote postcards. The sign said Dots, and the E in Dots Diner was always flickering, like it was winking at you. Inside, the booths were covered in red vinyl, and the air smelled like pancakes and motor oil from the mechanics who came in from the shop next door. Claire worked the counter. First thing that hit me was her laugh. It hit like sunlight. She had dark hair in a loose braid and a white apron smudged with coffee and blueberry pie. She called everyone honey without making it cheap. When I took a stool and asked for an omelet, she set a second hand on the counter without thinking. One for me, one for my partner Mike, and that tiny kindness caught me off guard. She looked me over the way a good nurse does, like she's inventorying you for cuts and bruises you're not copping to. Then she said, "You look like a boy who hasn't slept in a few tornadoes." I said, "You got a bed in the back?" She snorted and said, "In your dreams, lineman." The way she said the word lineman, I wanted to become the best one who ever climbed a pole. We made each other laugh that day. I came back the next, and the next. The routine of tornado work crushed the calendar, but Dot's Diner became my church. I learned she took care of her mom, who was sick with a cough they said was stress. I learned her dad ran off when she was 11 and left behind a stack of postcards from places he never traveled, purchased at truck stops off I-80. She said she was saving money to go to community college and become a teacher. I learned she loved the old music and every song Patsy Cline recorded, and that when she got tired, her hands shook just a little. I loved that she tried to hide it and failed. I liked that she was stronger than she knew. On the hottest day in July, the power went out at the diner and we brought in a generator. Mike and I set it up and I thought we were showing off. Claire laughed at us like we were building a moon rocket with duct tape. When the jukebox came alive, she tipped her head and said, "Pick one, Ohio." So I picked Crazy. She closed her eyes and for a minute the entire place got quiet. I think that was the first time I wanted to stay somewhere forever. The last night before our crew moved on, I took her to the reservoir. We bought boiled peanuts from a guy who sold them out of a cooler, and we sat on the tailgate of my truck watching fireflies stitch light along the grass. The sky looked close enough to kiss. I had $21 in my wallet and a life's worth of bravado. I told her I could come back after the crew finished the next town. I told her I'd find an apartment and she could take the second bedroom even if she didn't want anything else. I told her I didn't know what I was doing, but I wanted to do it with her. She said, "Hank, you talk like a man who always thinks the road will be there tomorrow." I said, "Isn't it?" She looked at me, and her eyes did this thing they did when she was deciding whether to trust the world. Then she nodded. She gave me her address on a paper napkin in looping letters, like something from a movie. She kissed me quick, and it felt like somebody slid a coin in the jukebox of my chest and the song started. We left for Danville in the morning. For the next 6 weeks, I wrote her letters from motel rooms, with ice machines that froze up and laundromats that smelled like hot pennies. I told her about the weather, and about Mike losing his wallet, and about the old woman who tried to pay us in jars of peaches. I told her I'd be back by September 1st. It felt like a promise you make to yourself while you're looking in a mirror. What I couldn't plan for was the call from my sister saying my dad had fallen off a ladder and cracked his head on the garage floor. In those days, you could drive 12 hours on coffee and stubbornness, and I did it without saying goodbye to anybody because I thought a day or two wouldn't change anything. When I got to Dayton, my father's face looked smaller. When a man who never apologized gets quiet, you start hearing all the words he should have said. My mother sat in a chair that looked bigger than she was, hands folded, as if she were waiting to be told she could breathe. I stayed. Weeks turned into months. Then the money turned into bills with red stamps. In late October, I went back down to Eden to find Claire, laden stupid with excuses. Dot's Diner had a hand-lettered sign that said "Closed for repair." In the parking lot, a man pumped the brakes on his Buick, while a woman walked a little dog that yipped at a seagull. I stood there too long. Across the street, a kid rode a bike in circles like he was scribbling something on the asphalt. I checked my pocket for the napkin with her neat handwriting. It wasn't there. I found out later the diner had closed because Dot's brother had a stroke and they were short-staffed. But in that moment, it felt like the door of the world had shut. I found Claire's address in the phone book at the public library. It still worked like a minor miracle and drove to the little rented house. The porch had a wind chime that sang for nobody. A neighbor watering her hedges said, "They moved couple weeks ago. She thought maybe the girl got a job up in Madison." Then she said, "You should have come sooner, sugar," with the sort of sympathy people give you when they don't want to think about their own regrets. I wrote her a letter anyway, then another. Then I wrote a third, and it came back with a stamp that said, "Forwarding order expired," like fate itself had lost track of her. After that, I did a thing people think men don't do. I went out back behind my mother's garage and cried into the smell of grass clippings like a boy. Time did what it does. I took a permanent job with the utility in Dayton. I learned to keep a crew safe in the rain. I learned that fear is a tool, not a cage. I fell into a bar habit for a while, and then fell into a marriage with a woman named Lucy, who deserved more from the world than I could give. We had a daughter, Em. I loved her so much I felt scared to hold her. Lucy told me she needed me to stop carrying the ghost of my first love around like a statue in my pocket. I told her I wouldn't mention it again. I meant it that day. We tried. We lasted 12 years. I'm not proud or ashamed when I say it ended because we were worn out and honest. The day we signed the papers, we bought each other a cup of coffee and said we'd try to be better friends than we were spouses. Some people think that's sad. For me, it felt like mercy. Now, you know how life will sometimes save a punchline for 20 years? The first twist came in 2016 at my brother Ray's kitchen table. He was the pretty one in our family, played football, hair like a shampoo commercial, the whole 9 yards. He could charm cashiers out of expired coupons. But time had done the thing with his gut and hairline, same as it had with mine, and now he had liver trouble from a lifetime of drinking he did more handsomely than I did. He called one night and said, "Come over. Bring those cinnamon donuts from the BP. The way he said it made me pick up my keys. I walked into his kitchen, and he was sitting at the table, elbows propped the way boys aren't supposed to do in school, eyes red from some combination of whiskey and waiting. He said, "I did a bad thing a long time ago, Hank." He slid a shoebox across the table. It held letters. My letters. They were addressed to Claire. The stamps were the old kind, Liberty bells and flags, and some were postmarked with towns whose names sounded like stories. The box also held 12 letters with my name on them in that same looping handwriting. They were opened, and the edges were brown like somebody had tried to burn them and chickened out halfway through. Ray said he took them from the mailbox that fall when I was back in Dayton helping our dad. He said he did it because he couldn't stand how I looked when I talked about her. He thought breaking the thing quick would help it heal faster. He cried while he told me, and I wanted to break his jaw and hug him at the same time. I read the first letter, and it was Claire telling me her mother's cough was getting worse, and how she was thinking about enrolling in night classes, and how she tried to make biscuits, and they came out like little hockey pucks. I read the second, and it was her telling me she missed the way I flipped a coin, that everything I did was like that, heads, hearts. I read as far as I could, reading before my eyes turned into two little hurricanes. On the bottom of the box was a small blue envelope that had fallen behind the rest. It was dated November 1978. Inside was a letter that began with, "Hank, I'm late, and I don't know if it's anything, but I thought you should know." I read that sentence until the words looked like shapes. By the time I went home early that morning, the light over Ray's sink had turned the color of the yolk of a sunny-side-up egg. I drove past all the places I'd taken for granted. The gas station where the clerk knew my name. The field behind the high school where the marching band practiced. A woman jogging in the cold with a pink hat. Everything had a sharper edge, like I'd been walking around with my glasses smeared. Here is where the story got stranger, and where the second twist did me in. 2 months after Ray's confession, I got an email with the subject line, "New DNA match." You've seen these on TV, spit in a tube and find out you're part Viking, or that your great-great-grandma lied about being Irish. I'd sent my kid in after my daughter gave it to me as a goofy Christmas gift. This email said I had a new close relative. It said parent-child 100. The name was Benjamin Carter. I remember all of it like a photograph. The way the coffee had gone cold. The lawn outside with frost on it like sugar. The way my hands trembled so bad I had to hold the phone in both, like I was taking a picture of a hawk. I clicked the message and there he was. A picture of a man in his 30s. He had my ears and someone else's eyes. He wore a police uniform. He was smiling in that stiff way people smile in official photos when their mouth wants to be nice and their job wants them to be serious. There was a message attached. "Hi, Mr. Whitaker," it said. "My name is Ben. I was adopted. I grew up in Greensboro. I'm not here to crash your life. I'm just looking for where I come from. If I've made a mistake, I'm sorry. If I haven't, hello." I didn't answer right away. I am not proud of that. I sat there with the phone and walked circles around the kitchen island like a fish in a little tank. Finally, I wrote back, "Ben, I think we need to talk," and included my number. He called within a minute, and I jumped so hard I knocked over my mug. We talked for 2 hours. He told me his adoptive parents were school teachers and the best kind of good. He told me he always wondered about the quiet place inside him. He said he clicked send on that first message and then stared at the screen like a man staring down a train. I told him I only had a few pieces of the story and didn't want to lie with facts I didn't have. I asked for his birth mother's name. He said, "Claire Monroe." The way he said it, slow like he knew the name could break me. He didn't know it already had. I want you to understand something. I had spent my whole adult life building stories out of gaps. I filled in blank places with theories and drinks and work. Hearing her name from my son, that erased years like chalk. It also laid down a line I had to cross, or I'd be a coward forever. I called the county clerk the next day and asked for records I had no right to. I called a hospital and a church and a library because those are the places that keep the world together. Most closed doors stayed closed, and then I got a message on my voicemail from a woman who said, "I think I know Claire. She works at a thrift store in Asheville when she's up to it. If you're who you say you are, please call me back." I drove down there in a kind of fear I hadn't felt since the night my daughter was born, and they said she wasn't breathing right. My truck made a noise it didn't make before, and I couldn't tell if that was new or if I was hearing other things for the first time. The thrift store was low-ceilinged and smelled like wool sweaters left in a cedar chest. The bell on the door rang, and the girl at the counter looked like every teenager, which is to say she looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. There were end tables and old golf clubs and one of those bread machines everyone bought in the 90s and used twice. When Claire came out from the back, I didn't recognize her at first. That is hard to say. The life in her had been reshuffled. She was still beautiful, but the kind that makes you double take for the stories in it, not the kind that makes you forget them. Her hair was shorter and mostly gray. Her hands still shook a little when she was tired. She wore a sweater with a snag near the cuff and a name tag that said Claire in blue ink. She looked up and it happened like a wave. First a little tilt of the head, then the eyes, then something in her chest changed, and she put a hand on the counter like the floor had moved. I said her name, and she said mine like it tasted like a word you're not allowed to say in church. Then she started to laugh and cry in the same breath, and I had to look down because my knees felt like they'd made an appointment to betray me. She took my arm and led me into the little back room where they'd sorted donations. There was a sign about not leaving good stuff on the concrete because of moisture. It was the ugliest place to have your life change. She closed the door and leaned against it and said, "I put you down as my next of kin a while back. Maybe that's crazy. It's just that I don't have a lot of people. My mother passed in 81. I never married." She looked at me like she'd said something shameful. Then she said, "Are you okay?" I said I had 100 questions and an answer I wasn't sure I knew how to give. I told her about Ben. She put both hands over her mouth. She made a sound that wasn't a word, and then she slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor. I sat with her because the air up higher didn't feel friendly. She said she got pregnant in the fall after I left. She tried to write me. She tried to find me. She worked the diner until her belly showed, and then Dot let her count cash in the back, because folks in town back then loved to gossip more than they loved the truth. She said she gave birth at a hospital in Greensboro, where they wrapped kindness around shame and called it privacy. She said the nurse told her she could hold the baby for 5 minutes and then she had to decide. She said she named him Samuel on the paperwork, a private name she folded up inside her, and she told herself he would get a better life. She said she never moved back to Eden because Eden was where she loved me, and she couldn't survive the geography of our ghost. I cried and I didn't hide it. Neither did she. I told her my brother had taken the letters because he thought he was doing me a kindness that looks like murder in slow motion. I told her I spent years pretending to be okay. She told me she spent years pretending not to look for my face in crowds. We said 100 variations on "I'm sorry" without either of us keeping score. We called Ben from that ugly back room. He answered on the first ring and said, "Hey," and then he said, "Are you two together?" We told him we were. He asked if it felt weird. I said it felt like the world had paused so we could catch up. He said he'd drive up the next weekend. He called his adoptive mom and dad first. His dad cried. His mom said to tell us she understood and that she loved the kind of love that makes more love. I've held on to that phrase ever since. Here's your third twist, and it's more complicated than a tidy story. When I saw Claire a second time that week, she told me she was sick. She'd kept it out of her voice the first day, like you hold back the tide with your hands. Heart failure. She'd fainted at the thrift store a couple months earlier and ended up in the hospital. The doctor said something about ejection fraction and her heart doing half the work it should. She didn't make a lot of money and she was proud, so she was pretending to be fine. She had a medication list on a folded paper in her pocket like a secret recipe. I said, "Then I'll take you to your appointments." She said, "No, I've been doing this." I said, "I didn't ask what you were doing. I said what I'm going to do." I'm not an expert at love, but I know my way around logistics. People think love is flowers and trips. Sometimes it's getting somebody to the doctor and then sitting in a waiting room with a stale coffee that tastes like a cigar. I moved slower than my heart wanted because I've learned the hard way that people aren't projects. Claire let me help the way a person on a lake lets someone else take the oar for a while when their arms are rubber. We didn't talk about what we were, because we both had scars that had turned into maps, and maps aren't good company for labels. Ben came the next Saturday. He brought his fiancée, Katie, who walked in like the storm of it all, couldn't knock her small frame off balance. They were beautiful the way young people are when they stand close without looking embarrassed. Watching him watch Claire was a holy thing. He kept cataloging her in that quiet way, like he was taking a census of features he'd wondered about. He had her mouth. He had my hands. He hugged her and it looked like a bridge closing. We didn't take any pictures that first day. It felt like if we trapped it in pixels, we'd cheapen the miracle. We sat and ate takeout barbecue off paper plates and told the story forward and backward, and whenever it got too heavy, Katie saved us with a joke that let the air back in. When they left, Ben hugged me twice, once like a stranger and once like a son. When the door closed, Claire leaned against it and said, "I didn't know you could feel so happy and so scared in the same minute." We started living an adult version of young love. That means pharmacies and insurance fights mixed with walks down by the French Broad River, holding hands like teenagers. We argued about nothing in particular, just to prove we were real. We shopped at the farmer's market and bought a watermelon that tasted like July. We made a list of old songs we loved, and I learned you can slow dance in a kitchen with your socks on and not fall if you keep laughing. But life isn't a greeting card, and I promised you unexpected turns. The call came in October, a nurse saying Claire had collapsed at work. I got to the hospital and they were using words like arrhythmia and ICU, and she's stable right now, like every syllable was a slippery stone in a river you have to cross. The doctor said her heart was wearing down and that a transplant wasn't a crazy conversation anymore. We waited. Waiting is its own kind of job. There's paperwork that feels designed to make you disqualify yourself, and soft-spoken social workers who look 10 years older than their resumes say. There's a kind chaplain who'll pray with you if you want and talk about baseball if you don't. Claire told me she didn't want me to feel trapped, like she needed to set me free before I even knew I was bound. I told her nobody could make me feel trapped by giving me a chance to do what I should have done when we were kids. On Thanksgiving, the hospital cafeteria served turkey that tasted better than I had any right to expect, and we sat with a couple from Tennessee waiting for their little girl to get a kidney. We told them our story in the short version. The mother put her hand over her heart and said, "You two are proof the world owes us happy endings it still keeps in the back closet. When a person you love is sick, you meet versions of yourself you didn't know you could be." I learned how to wrap a blanket around a night that felt like it would never end. I learned how to read the nurse's face like a weather map. I learned how to be quiet without making it feel like absence. I learned that most of us are walking around with something that would shatter if it took the wrong kind of fall. Christmas week, Ben and Katie came up with a tree small enough to fit on a windowsill. They hung 3 ornaments, a little police badge, a tiny lineman climbing a utility pole, and a painted book for Claire. We took a picture, and I keep it inside a worn leather wallet like a tiny altar. We sang along to carols off key, and I cried again because apparently that's my talent these days. January brought snow that made Asheville look like a storybook, even as it shut the roads and kept the nurses late. In February, Claire had a good week, and we went to the thrift store together. She fussed about price tags, and I carried boxes from a donation drop like a man who suddenly had the strength of 10 younger men. Near the register, Claire picked up a used cookbook with 100 index cards stuffed inside like a secret. She laughed. I took it to the counter and paid the $2. Back at her apartment, we opened it on the kitchen table. Inside the front cover was a postcard, old and creased. It was one of those cheap ones with a photo of a lighthouse, the kind they sell on a rack by the door of a generic gift shop. On the back, my name was written in a hand I'd know even if I was 100 years old. The stamp wasn't postmarked. It read, "I drove to Dayton in 1992 and parked across from the hardware store on Linden Avenue because someone told me that's where you worked. You came out with a box on your shoulder and a wedding ring on your hand. You laughed with a man in an apron." I didn't want to take anything from anybody, so I drove home. I'm keeping this as proof I could find you when I wanted to, and that sometimes loving somebody means letting the life they chose keep breathing. C. I closed the book and held it against my chest. Claire said she'd tucked that postcard away in a box years ago and hadn't thought of it again. She shrugged and said, "Isn't it funny the way things come back when they're ready? I don't believe in magic, but I do believe the world tries every now and then to get our attention." Spring pulled us through. The transplant list is like waiting for rain in a drought. You pray for something that means someone else is losing what you need. That kind of math will bend your heart. There were days I thought I couldn't bear it. There were days I thought I'd never been stronger. I kept fixing things around Claire's apartment because if my hands were busy, I could keep the fear from flowering. I repaired a cabinet hinge and a leaky faucet and a wobbly table leg. I told myself I was auditioning to be the man I wanted to be when I was 19. The call for the transplant came in May. It was a Tuesday and I was in Home Depot buying screws. My phone buzzed and I saw the hospital's number, and the world went quiet in that big bright store, like somebody turned down the volume knob on reality. The doctor said there was a match. He said to get Claire there. He said the cross match looked promising. He said hurry in that measured doctor way that sounds like an order and a prayer at once. We drove there with my hands clenched around the steering wheel so tight the grooves in the plastic left marks. Claire looked at the mountains passing like slow witnesses out the window and said, "If this is it, I need you to know something." She told me she didn't list me as next of kin because she expected me to show up. She did it because she needed to feel like the world had a thread that connected to something that once made sense. She said she put my name down the day she watched one of my videos on this very channel. She said she was scrolling late, and there I was telling a story about the time I fixed a downed line in a blizzard and how we brought a little town's lights back on, and how the guy in the diner clapped when the lights flickered on like it was Broadway. She said she recognized my voice before she recognized my face. She said she took a screenshot and carried it in her wallet. I almost had to pull over. The surgery took hours. The waiting room TV droned on about the weather in places we didn't live. The coffee machine tried to pass off hot brown water as comfort. Ben paced a line in the carpet like a soldier on guard. Katie rubbed his back until he relaxed and then started again when he didn't. I sat and stared at the door the surgeon would eventually walk through. I have prayed in my life in times that would make a believer out of a rock. This was one. The surgeon came out with a look I'll remember because it wasn't triumphant and it wasn't grim. It was careful. He said the transplant went as well as we could hope. He said now it was time to wait. He said the words rejection and anti-rejection and regimen, and we nodded like a group who had learned the hard vocabulary of the body. Claire woke with a voice that sounded like it had been to battle and back. Her first word was hey. Her second was Hank. Her third was water, and I never loved a simple word more. We took the next days one at a time. She cracked jokes about the hospital gown situation and told me to quit hovering like a summer fly. I said I'd hover all I wanted, and she stuck out her tongue. I told her she looked like a girl I used to know. There's a funny thing about getting what you've prayed for. At first, you just want to make sure it won't disappear if you blink. Then slowly, hour by hour, the future comes back into the room. We talked about small things because the big ones felt like large animals that might stampede if we looked at them too directly. We argued about the order of songs on the playlist I made for her recovery. We planned to go see the lighthouse on the coast that was on that old postcard, not because we needed to, but because it felt like good accounting. I wish I could tell you the rest is smooth sailing. Claire had complications. Twice the doctors looked at numbers with little frowns. Once she caught an infection, and I paced the halls until I could recite the nurse's steps from memory. But we made it through, with the help of a half-dozen helpers and the kind of patience that looks like nothing and feels like a miracle. Ben married Katie that September on a hill outside Greensboro. The sky was so generous it looked like it had pulled its pockets inside out to show us how much blue it had. Claire walked slow on the grass with a hand on my arm. People were kind in the way you wish they'd always be. No pity, lots of straight-faced help. During the ceremony, Ben's adoptive dad stood up and thanked everyone for loving his son. He looked at Claire and at me and said he believed the world wanted to keep families together, even if it took a weird map to do it. I cried. Don't act surprised. Claire squeezed my hand hard enough to say she was right there in it. At the reception, somebody pulled out an old speaker and put on Patsy Cline. Crazy came on, and Claire looked at me with a smile that had not changed since Dot's Diner. We danced. She was careful with her steps. I held her like something you respect, not something you own. People watched and then looked away because they knew enough to give us the privacy you give soldiers when they fold a flag. Later, near dusk, Ben pulled us aside. He gave Claire a small box. Inside was a silver necklace with a tiny lighthouse pendant. He said, "For the postcard and for the second chances." He gave me a keychain with a tiny utility pole and said, "For the times you climb toward light." I didn't know a keychain could make a man's chest hurt with gratitude. But there you go. The last twist happened a year later, and it didn't knock me down. It lifted me up. I came home one afternoon and found a letter in my mailbox with no return address, just the neat handwriting of someone who learned to write when penmanship was something you could be proud of. Inside was a copy of a birth certificate from 1979 that listed the child as Samuel and the mother as Claire. In the margin, in pencil, she had written the middle name, Henry. She had named him Samuel Henry for me and for her grandfather. She had done that without ever knowing if I'd read it. Something about that got into the cracks of me and filled them with gold like those Japanese pots they fix with lacquer. I am not who I was because that name lived in the world all those years like a candle in a window. If you're wondering if Claire and I got married, the answer is no. We sat on her porch one night with a quilt over our knees and a bowl of sliced peaches between us and talked it through. We are not the kids we were. We are two grown folks who have learned how to hold and how to let go. We decided our version of forever looks like being on each other's emergency contacts and splitting the check for diner pancakes and showing up to hear our son talk about his bad days on the job. It looks like me unclogging her sink and her making me call my cardiologist when I act tough and skip appointments. It looks like being honest. It looks like I love you without the paperwork. It looks like not risking the quiet we worked so hard to earn for a word that once broke us. Some folks won't get that. That's okay. We do. Sometimes at night, I scroll through your comments on these videos and you tell me your stories, the ones that knocked you down, the ones that came back, the ones that never did. I believe everyone. I believe our lives are made of the things that didn't happen and the things that did, and the courage to tell the difference. I went back to Eden once last year to stand outside the empty lot where Dot's Diner used to be. There's a small insurance office there now with a glass door that reflects your face back at you in a way that makes you think about how much you've changed. I stood in the parking lot and could almost hear the bell on that door, and the jukebox, and Claire calling me Ohio with a smile in it. I said thank you out loud. If anyone saw, they probably thought I was a man on the phone. Maybe I was. When I got back to Asheville, Claire was waiting on her porch. She asked if I'd found what I came for. I said, I found out I don't hate the boy I was anymore. She said that's a good day's work. We sat there until the streetlights came on. 3 kids raced their bikes down the hill, and one of them skinned his knee and didn't even notice until his friends pointed, and then he started crying. We laughed at that, not at him, but at the way humans are. Then we went in and made grilled cheese sandwiches like it was a holiday. If you hear anything in this long, messy memory, hear this. Love is a stubborn thing. It will wait in a box for 40 years. It will cross state lines in a borrowed car. It will ride along in your bloodstream until the day you need a new heart, and then it will sit beside your bed and hold your hand. It will get the timing wrong and then get one bright minute exactly right, and that minute will be enough to make the rest make sense. And if you are the one who broke something worth keeping, there is still a world where you can pick up pieces and try again. Maybe you don't get a wedding. Maybe you get a porch and a quilt and peaches and a playlist of old songs. Maybe you get a son who calls you on Tuesdays to tell you about the new coffee place he found, and a woman who squeezes your hand when Patsy Cline comes on the radio, and a keychain in your pocket that reminds you light is work and somebody has to climb toward it. That's all I've got for today. If this story found a little spot in you and put a chair there, will you do me a favor? Hit subscribe. Remember, 96% of you who watch these videos aren't subscribed, and that number sticks in my craw. It makes me sad because I want you here for the next one. Tap the like button, leave a comment, tell me about the letter you never sent, or the person who surprised you by showing up anyway. This is Hank, and you've been watching Mind-Blowing Stories. Thanks for staying to the end. I'll see you next time.